since this is not a political shiur, that one of the sponsors of this week's Shabbos Shorts was David Maisel with Hakaras Hatov to the President Trump and Jared Kushner for their efforts and successes to support Eretz Yisrael and further peace process. Okay, the first category, Mazel Tovs to Gabi and Zahava Besimon on the son becoming a bar mitzvah.
Mazel
Mazel Tov. Also, Debbie and Jacob Frankel on the birth of their first grandchild.
Mazel Tov.
Other Mazel Tovs? No, okay. Category 2 are for Shlomo.
Rav David Meir ben Chaya Sipa.
David Meir ben Chaya Sipa.
Rav Yitzchak Zev ben Devora.
Yitzchak Zev ben Devora.
Chaim Aiden Shalom ben Alta Brina.
Chaim Aiden Shalom ben Alta Brina.
Zev ben Leah.
Zev ben Leah.
Chayariva bas Yehudas Devora.
Chayariva bas Yehudas Devora.
Thank you.
Also, Raveh Binyamin Raphael ben Rayut.
Raveh Binyamin Raphael ben Rayut.
This is the 8-year-old boy that
Ben Rayut,
here
yes.
in the States to try and save his life.
Yeah.
Natana Lilan ben Shena Tzipora.
Natana Lilan ben Shena Tzipora.
And just to point out that our fervent prayers for Rabbi Hyatt should be especially fervent. He's still struggling in the hospital. They had him off the ventilator for a couple of days, but he's back on it. And,
he's back on it.
I'm sorry?
I was hoping they would have him off. Yeah.
He was off back on, I don't know, maybe since Friday there may be a change, but pray hard.
All right, the special for Shalema, Rabbi Fall, Yisrael Yaakov ben Bela, Shoshana Tova bas Esther, Chana bas Leah. Everyone should have a refuah shalema, and the Baruch Shalom should give a special rachmim in this very difficult time.
Amen.
Okay.
Okay. No other refuah shlemas. Okay, so then the category 3 is yard sides.
I was going to say my father-in-law, whose yard side is actually today. He died Erev Yom Kippur. Harav Abraham Mordechai ben Shmuel Elchanan.
Abraham Mordechai ben Shmuel Elchanan.
Stuart Margalis is not here, and he wants to say yard site for his brother. It's the third yard site of his brother, who also passed away Erev Yom Kippur, and that is Raphael Shimon Levi ben Yeshua HaLevi.
For Shimon HaLevi ben Yeshua HaLevi.
I just got off the phone with Yitz Stokes. I wished him a Gemar Tov. He's doing fine. They're davening outside in a tent. And he reminded me that Motzai Yom Kippur is the third yard site for his wife, Ruth Rachel Bas Avram.
Ruth Rachel Bas Avram.
Thank you.
Okay. And my mother's yard site is on Shmini Atzeres, Chana Leah Bas Menachem Mendel HaLevi. So all the neshamas should have an aliyah. The Baruch Shalom should have special recognition of all the neshamas. Of course, we say Yizker, so we have everybody in mind. And we need those neshamas as well to be Meilitz Yosher for all of us, all of Klal Yisrael in this difficult time. So wherever we are, we'll daven fervently with great kavanah.
Okay, also yard site for my mother, Shalom, which will be on Monday after the end of Sukkot, which is Shabbos Sunday.
Right.
It's Monday. Anna Bas Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen.
Anna Bas Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen.
I might as well then, my father's yard side is the day after that.
Yeah.
Also, Yisrael Avram ben Asher.
Yisrael Avram ben Asher. All right, so all the yard sides, the refuah shalemas, we'll get going. Erev Yom Kippur, we'll try to get everything done on time. So we're continuing on the Gemara of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph near the bottom. This Gemara essentially was dealing with the question of whether or not a person has to stand next to a field in order for the field to be koneh, right? So that was, so the Mishnah started talking about deer that couldn't run, or birds that couldn't fly, and whether or not your field, and they landed in your field, whether or not your field can be koneh. So Rabbi Yehuda and Shmuel introduced the concept, only if you're standing next to your field can it be koneh. If you're not standing, then anybody can come onto your field and grab the deer, or grab even an object that somehow landed, a meteor. I mean, any object in your field, which you think your field is koneh, because it's your field, it's chotzer. Teretz is, so Rabbi Yehuda and Shmuel, that no, you have to be there. Then the Gemara went back and forth and wanted to learn a question from Masris, if you gave Maser, if you were in the field or you were in the city. So that last week we went into detail about all those different instances about when you can give and when you cannot give. And the Gemara ends up at least with the decision that that you can be koneh, but only when you're there. So with regard to Maser, it's a little bit tricky, because whether or not you were in the field when you dedicated, rather shikha, not Maser, shikha, whether you dedicated the shikha while you were in the field or not. But the bottom line, that's how the Gemara comes out. The Gemara comes out that you have to be there standing next to the field. So about 5 lines from the bottom, the Gemara says, "V'chein Omer Ula." Ula, the Amora endorsed Rabbi Yehuda and Shmuel's view, and he says, "V'hu she'omer b'tzad tzadeu." V'chein Omer Rabbi Bar Chana. Rabbi Bar Chana also says, "V'hu she'omer b'tzad tzadeu." So these two Amoraim, the Gemara finds worthy to bring down that they supported Rabbi Yehuda and Shmuel's view that you have to be by the field in order for it to be koneh. So now the Gemara is going to ask a very interesting question. For that, we'll read the question, and then I'll take a few minutes, because this is a Mishnah in Maser Sheni, which is very important. Esvei Rav Abba le'Ula. So Rav Abba asked Ula, they were contemporaries, "You're telling me that you have to stand next to the field in order for the field to be koneh. Listen to this. Masa b'Rav Gamliel v'Zakanim, Rav Gamliel and other of the Zakanim, Shohayu Boim b'Sfina, they were on a ship. Omar Rav Gamliel, and Rav Gamliel had fields back home, and he had to give Maser. And he did not designate Maser before he left. So he says on the ship, Shiur, the Maser, Shani Osid Lomud, which I'm going to identify and give, Noisein Liyahoshua. I'm giving it to Yehoshua. So what does that mean, says Rashi? Shani Osid Limud Nisker Shalo Isher Masrosav. He remembered that he didn't give Maser, Vahuk Shalo Umiher, and it was difficult. Umiher La'asron Ba'asher Sham. So he wanted to give it right there on the ship. So who does he give it to? Nosli Yeshua. Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, Shehu Imo Basvina, Vahu Levi. Rabbi Shua ben Chananya was a Levi, who was with him on the ship, and he says, Yeshua, I'm giving it to you. Venotel Maser Rishon. Kinamrina be'erchen, Maser Rabbi Yeshua, Shalach Lasayas, Rabbi Yochanan ben Gedudya, Bahagofas Dulsas, they were fixing some doors or whatever they were doing. Amalo Chozer Bach, Sha'atamina HaMeshoverim, Ba'animina HaMeshu'urim. You're from the singers, meaning you're a Levi. You're from the singers, and I have to give Maser. So he's just bringing a raya that Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya was a Levi. But nevertheless, what happened? He was on the ship, and he realized that he hadn't given Maser. And so he wanted to make sure that the people back home might have assumed he gave Maser that we're going to take from the field and eat. So he quickly gave Maser to Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. And okay, so that was the Maser that happened. And okay, let's go to, so the top of Yud Aleph Amid Beis, Umakomo Muskalo. And the place of where the Maser was on, he rented to him. All right, so let's stop there for a minute, because before we get into this, I just want to quickly go over this Mishnah, because this Mishnah is very, very important, Bichlal, but to understand what we're talking about. So it's a Mishnah in the 5th parak of Master Sheni, and it reads as follows. So I'm going to read from the Mishnah. Misha hayaperosiv rechokim imenu. If someone owned a field that was far away from him, and he has to give maser, so the Mishnah says, Tzarach likro lahem shem. He has to give a name. What does that mean? Poloni, in other words, we'll see that it's talking about Truma and Maser and Masa Oni, all three. We'll see in a minute. Ploni Kohen Yiske Betruma, Sheyesh Lo B'Makom Ploni, and the same for the Levi and same for the Oni. So in other words, he has to announce, Sheyomar Ploni, so and so. Now, the halacha is that if you announce and you give it to the Levi or the Kohen, whoever happens to be, then you don't have to tell him which it is yet. You don't have to tell him it's the northwest corner or the southeast corner. You're just giving it. Once you give it, anybody can eat from the rest of it. And then when he comes back, he'll say, this is the Maser. So let's say he has a 100-acre field, and Maser is 10%. So he'll give, let's say, 10 acres. He doesn't have to designate which of the 10 acres he's going to give. As long as he says, I'm giving Yeshua B'Chananya the 10 acres, it's already good. And then he gives it later. So that's the halacha. Now, so what does the Mishnah say? They bring down this Mishnah. Masav Rabbi Gamliel Vazakem Shahim Bom Besfina. Amar Rabbi Gamliel. So I'm reading from the Mishnah. Iser Sha'ani Osid Lomud Nosan Yeshua. B'mkoma Muskalo. The exact words that we just read. And I'm going to rent him. Listen to this. I'm going to lease to him the portion of the field on which the master is on, whichever it is. So he will rent. He will have rented the field and the master will be on it. Okay? This is important. We'll see in a minute. Isha Achesh and Osid Lomud, another tenth, which I have to give, let's say, to Masa Oni. Nosan Lakiva ben Yosef, this is our Gemara too. She Yiskabola Niyam, because he was the Gabbai Tzedakah, and he would be Zecher for the Niyam. Umakoma Muskalo, and I'm going to lease it to him too. I'll lease him his acreage. And finally, not our Gemara, but just the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Isa Shani Osid Lomud, Nosan Lelazav and Azariah, who was a Kayan, because he had to give Truma. So he says, okay, I'm going to leave Umakoma Muskalo. So in other words, he's leasing for the Levi, for the Masa Ani, and for the Truma, which by the way is the first, because Truma you have to give first. So you give first the Truma, then the Masa, and then the Masa Ani. And in all of them he rented, and each one exchanged money. In other words, if he leased it to Yeshua ben Chananya, Yeshua Chananya had to give him the rent for the field, so he had to pay him. So he paid him for the field, and in turn he got the rental of the field and the masa that was on it. Okay, that is the Mishnah. Now, what is important to understand from this Mishnah, because the Mishnah will tell us, is okay. So now, the Taisus Yontif or the Meforshim say the following. This is the punchline that is going to be important. V'niskablu zem ez eschar. Rabbi Gamliel kibul demei schiras hamokim Rabbi Yeshua Rabbi Akiva. He got the money. Rabbi Yeshua kibul Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah because he was the kayin. V'nikdin chol echad mokim hamasa haroy lo b'kesef. Each one received the place of the masa, meaning the land, for money. Seschiras karka nikdas b'kesef, because karka is rented with money. Now here, va'agav hamokim zocher b'maser, and because of the rental, agav hamokim zocher maser. This is what's known in the Gemara parlance as kinyan agav. What is the kinyan agav? Because this is agav hamokim zocher maser. Shemetaltlin mikdin agav karka, because metaltlin are kona agav, meaning on top of or with the karka. So you could go ahead and lease someone a piece of land, And you can say that with this land, he's also getting the following metaltalin. Metaltalin are movable objects. So, and not only that, but the movable objects don't have to be on the land. They can be somewhere totally in another place. But he wants to link them. So he says, I'm going to lease you this land. You're going to pay me the money. And by the way, you're also going to be zoche to such and such metaltalin, either on the land or separately, doesn't matter. So the Mishnah tells us that the kinyan of the maser or of the truma or masa ani is through kinyan agav. Kinyan agav. Let's remember that. Now let's look at the Gemara. Now let's go to our Gemara, because now we'll understand what our Gemara is telling us. So we started by saying that he gave it to Yeshua, top of Yud Aleph Amid Beis, Makoma Muskalo. Look at Rashi, Makoma Muskalo. The Kibul Mimenu Shom Schar Hamakom. He gave him the schar, as the Mishnah says. The Hachitani Sefer. Niskablu Zem Ezek, because the Sefer of that Mishnah which we read said Niskablu Zem Ezek schar, that the Ish got money from Gamliel got from all of them. Kol Kach Loma. Why did he do this? Kidei liknois maser. Shetehei chatzero konolo. Rashi doesn't say agav. Rashi say that his chotzer will be konen. The visha metaltalin ein konen ela ober meshicha or chatzero tiknalo. So Rashi is telling us something different here. Rashi is telling us that when Rav Gamliel got the money from these three Amoraim for the various kinyanim that they were making on the land, and they were going to get the produce on that land for their respective share, whether it was truma or masa or whatever. And Rashi says, because how do you acquire metaltalin? Either b'mashicha, in other words, you pull it, you take it, you pick it up, whatever it is, oh, b'chotzer. So what he's implying here is that when they rented the land, the produce that was on the land, they acquired through kinyan chotzer. Yeah, Jay.
I forgot to mention a refuah shlema for Alan Zeman's grandson, who is back in the hospital. He's in a coma. Came out, and so I don't know his name, but we should keep that in mind. I'm sorry for that.
I mentioned his name in the refuah shlemas.
Okay, I missed it. All right, good. So, sorry for interrupting.
Right. So all right. So this is Rashi's interpretation. Now back to the Gemara, and he said, "The isha shani osed limud nasan la'akiva ben Yosef kadesh yiskabol la'aniyim u'makoma maskalo." And Rashi says nasan la'akiva gabehu. He was the gabai. Va'osa shana shnas masa oni hoisa. In other words, we know that in the cycle of Masa, the 7-year cycle, you have to give 2 Masas every year. Masa Rishon, and then either Masa Sheni or Masa Ani. Masa Ani, you give in the 3rd and the 6th year. Masa Sheni, which you yourself take up to Yerushalayim, you give in the other years. So this must have been one of the Masa Ani years. And so he had to give Masa Ani, and he gave it to Akiva ben Yosef, who was the Gabbai. Frek the Gemara. Okay, so that's the situation. Frek the Gemara. So this is the kasha. This is the kasha that Rabbi Bar Chana asks on Ula. V'chi Rabbi Yeshua v'Rabbi Akiva b'tzad Sadei Yerushalayim Gamliel hayu omdim. Straightforward kasha. You're trying to tell me, Ula, that you support Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, who says that in order to be koneh, you have to be standing next to the side of the field, and then you can be koneh. How did Rav Gamliel do this transaction? Were they standing by the field? They weren't standing next to the field when this happened. They were on a ship out at sea, and yet Rav Gamliel was able to transact this and give them the maser ani, maser rishon. How could you possibly do that? You can't do that if you're not standing next to the field, according to Ula. So this is Rabbi Bar Chana's question. This is Rabbi Bar Chana's question on Ula. How can you support Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel and say you have to be next to the field in order to be koneh? We see from this Mishnah, which we just read in Masa Sheni, that that's not the case. You don't have to stand next to it. So that's his kasha. It's a good kasha, right? Omalei. So Ula answered him very sarcastically, and he said to him, Amalei, he said to him, Dame Haimer Rabbanan Kidlo Gomre Anshe Shmata. It seems like this member of the rabbis, meaning Rabbi Rechana, no one explained the halacha to him. It's a very sarcastic way of saying, what's he asking such a kasha? It's not even a kasha, it's a nonsense. Okay? But he doesn't explain why he said it, but he's saying the kasha has no merit. Okay, so we're going to understand what the kasha is in a minute and why it does or doesn't have merit. But that was his response. He said, no, I'm not even answering that kasha. It doesn't matter. Ki also the surah. So remember, Surah Pumpadisa, these are the Greek Torah centers. So Rabbi Bar Chana came to Surah, Omalahu, and he told the rabbis there, Hachi Oma Ula, Hachi Osive. This is my exchange with Ula. Ula said you have to stand next to the field, and I brought down a Mishnah in Masasheni with Rav Gamliel that you don't have to stand next to the field. So tell me, he's asking the rabbis there, tell me, who's right, what's going on? So one of the rabbis in Surah said to him, Rav Gamliel Miltaltale Agav Mekarke Hiknolohem. So now comes out that they said, no, Rabbi Bar Chana, you have no kasha on Ula. Your kasha on Ula it's a kinyan chotzer. And therefore with a kinyan chotzer, he's getting the produce. And we know that by chotzer, because our Mishnah is talking about chotzer. The Mishnah in Yud Aleph Amud Aleph talks about chotzer. So by a kinyan chotzer, we're saying that you have to stand next to it. That's not the case. Why? Because Rav Gamliel is giving the produce with a kinyan agav. What is he doing? He's leasing them the field. They are now the balabatim of that field for that period of time. And agav, together, incidental, they're getting the maser. So it's not kinyan chotzer, it's kinyan agav, which is why the Mishnah tells us that. The Mishnah, which I read before, says specifically, and the Tosfos Yontif, I mean, how were they koned? He says to him, "Ba'agav hamokim zocher b'maser," and agav, with the place that they lease, there is zocher b'maser. There's a big difference between chotzer and kinyan agav. Kinyan agav plays by a different set of rules than kinyan chotzer. You want to tell me that it's a kinyan chotzer? It's not a kinyan chotzer. That's why I said pay attention to the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says kinyan agav. Rashi somehow says, no, it's a chotzer, everything is, he says, no. So the Gemara says right away that they told him over there in Surah, you have no kasha. How do you know that he did it with a chotzer? He did it with a kinyan agav, and a kinyan agav, you don't have to stand. Why? How do we know you don't have to stand by kinyan agav? Because what did I say before? That a kinyan agav, you can convey metaltalin that's in another place entirely. It's not even on the karka. If that's the case, the karka you're not worried about. The karka is there, and he's leasing it to him. And the metaltalin, how can he stand next to the field? The metaltalin is not even on the field. Because if we say kinyan agav with metaltalin that is in another place entirely, then there's no point in being next to the field. So therefore, by kinyan agav, you don't have to be next to the field. So this Rav in the Rabbanim in Surah telling Rabbi Chana, no, don't mistake it for kinyan chotzer. It's kinyan agav, and therefore you're not correct. But Ula was correct in his response. So that's what he's saying to here. So while they were standing there in Surah, Rav Zera Kibla, one of the Rabbanim who was there was Rav Zera, and he said, that's a good teretz, I accept it. Rabbi Abba lo Kibla. Rav Abba, Rabbi Bar Chana meaning, Rabbi Bar Chana, he's saying, did not accept it. He didn't accept the teretz. Actually, no, Rav Abba was someone else. Rav Abba lo Kibla. Rav Abba didn't accept the teretz as a distinction between kinyan agav. Okay, that's the Gemara. Omar Rava, comes Rava, he says, we're not finished here. Shaper Ovid lo Kibla. Rav Abba did correct that he did not accept the teretz that in other words, the distinction that Rabbi Barachana and that Ula is making is not a valid distinction. The distinction that he's saying it's Kinyan Agav as opposed to Chatzar, not a valid distinction. Why? So the Gemara is okay, so let's look at Rashi. Ki also Rav Abba l'Sura Amalahu. So they said to him, "Metaltale Agav Mekarke Hiknu Lahem." No, it's not Chatzar. It's Kinyan Agav, says Rashi. The lav mishum detikna lahem makom and b'toras chatzar. So he's saying beferish, not because he gave it to him b'toras chatzar, for which you would have perhaps a good kasha. Why aren't they standing there? Sha'afilu hikna lahem chatzar acheres, because even if he conveyed chatzar acheres she'ena betocha konui. So in other words, you can't. That's what I was saying before. With Kinyan Agav, the metaltalin don't have to be on that piece of land. Therefore, the whole subject of standing by the land to guard the land is moot, because you could even convey land that's in another state, in another country. It doesn't matter. Kiditnan, how do we know this? The Gemara in Kedushin says over there, at the time of Chizkiah, the Chizkiah Melech, Nichnosum she'en la machrayis niktin nechosum she'esh la machrayis. Ein la machrayis means movables, and yesh la machrayis means land. So you can be kind of nechosum she'ein lahem machrayis, meaning movables, in nechosum she'esh la machrayis, land, b'kesef, with money. Mishanosna kesef b'shvil karka, when you convey the money for the land, the hamataltalin, and for the metaltalin, or afilu karka b'mecher. Listen to this: afilu karka b'mecher, you're selling them a land, u'metaltalin b'matana, and you're giving the metaltalin as a gift. It's not even part of the sale. Niknin ha-metaltalin b'kinyan ha-karka below Mashicha, then Kinyan Agav takes over and says that you're kona, these movable objects, when you buy the land, even without doing Mashicha on the movables. So the movables, wherever they are so to speak, attached to the land. And even if the movables were not part of the sale, but you wanted to give it as a matana, as a gift, you could do it. How do we know this? Over there, by the time of Chizkiah, it says, matonos rabos lekesef ulazov im orim b'tzuros asher b'Yehuda. He conveyed these fortified cities which were in Yehuda, and with it, he gifted much kesef and zohar. So that's where we learn, he said, that's the source where we learn Kinyan Agav. So from there we see that you can convey movables together with the land. So that was his point, the Rav from Surah, and he said you cannot learn out this question from there because it has nothing to do with Chatzar, it has to do with Kinyan Agav. So now the Gemara says that Amar Rava, Shaper Avadalo Kibla. So Rav Abba did well, Kibla Lahai Terutza, this terrace. Why? Zok the Gemara Azai. Bechila Hoya Lehem Sudo Liktus Mimena B'Chalipin. Why? Here's the kasha. Chalipin is an exchange. We do this like Erev Pesach. When we go to the Rav and we give him, he gives us a handkerchief. We do Chalipin. We do so that he can acquire the chametz. Okay. So Kinyan Chalipin is a valid form of Kinyan. Frank the Gemara, why did he have to lease him property? And he had to pay for property. And then with the property, there was maser. Why did he have to spend money at all? He could have given it to him Kinyan Chalipin, says the Gemara. He could have given the Levi with a sudar, with a handkerchief. They could have made an exchange, and he could have conveyed to him the maser. So the Gemara doesn't understand why there has to be this transaction of money. Rashi says, why did he have to take money? Because he could have just exchanged to him with a handkerchief. Says the Gemara, you know why? Tovas hana, meaning the pleasure I get, so to speak, isn't enough to be kind of with chalipin. What is he saying? When you give maser, let's say you owe maser to the Levi, or even truma to the Kohen, doesn't matter. The minute that you reap the produce of your field, you owe this maser. In point of fact, the maser is not yours anymore. You don't own it. The 10 acres out of the 100 that we talked about before, regardless of where it is not yours. What do you have? You only have the tovas hana, the pleasure of naming the Levi or naming the Kohen. I want to give it to my favorite Kohen, so I can choose which Kohen or Levi. But you don't own it anymore. You're just the sort of the apitropis. You're you're the guardian to give it to a Kohen or a Levi, and you designate who it is. Says the Gemara with a chap. You ask the kasha, doesn't he have a sudar, a handkerchief to do chalipin? He says, no. Tovas hana eina mama liktus memena chalipin. You can't do chalipin with something you don't own. You don't own the maser anymore. The maser is automatically belongs to a Levi. And he's saying that tovas hana is not enough, says Rashi. Ela suda my tamalo the tovas hana shehoisol Rabbi Gamliel b'masas halalu, the pleasure, the tovas hana, the good fortune, the pleasure that he had with the masa eina chashuva moment, says Rashi, that tehei niknas b'chalipin, that you should be able to do chalipin. The lekala meimek yikonale Rabbi Gamliel lahai suda eknei chalipin the day b'chol makom shehein. You can't say that that typically with chalipin, when you do the exchange, then you're kona the property. Why? The kibbutz the ein lohen bohen elatovus hano shebiyado loseso lakol l'chol mishiyirte ein ze chashuv mamon l'chol ze al kinyan chalipin. So he's saying very clearly. Normally by chalipin, when you do chalipin, you take it over regardless of where it is, because you're getting something of value, you're giving and you're getting something of value. Here, the Rabbi Gamliel cannot participate in chalipin because he has nothing to convey. Only good fortune or a good name, or what we call goodwill. Goodwill isn't mammon. So therefore, he says he can't cut it with chalipin.
Excuse me, Rabbi. Okay. Is there a moment here where it becomes hefker, where really isn't an owner? I mean,
so it's a good question. So the whole kasha here is that by leasing the property to the Levi, he renounces rights to the property, right? Because it goes to the Levi. Whatever's on the property is hefker, and the Levi acquires it through hefker. That's exactly right. That's the purpose of the transaction that Rabbi Gamliel was doing. How was he going to give him the maser? He'll give him the maser by leasing to him the land. If he leases it to land, he no longer has control of what's on the land, and he makes it hefker. Now the Levi takes the produce, and that's his maser. So through hefker, he controls the maser. It's exactly correct. That's the principle of chotzer here. But we're saying, we want to say, wait a minute. No, it's not through chotzer, it's kinyan agav, so that he's automatically kona. In other words, substitute, he owns it through agav instead of hefker. We won't use by kinyan agav, we don't say hefker. We just say that he gave him a gift. Maser is a gift, right?
So there's no dead spot there.
There's no dead spot, exactly. Right, but by kinyan agav, you don't have to have hefker because you have a matana, and a matana is exactly what you're giving when you give maser or truma. You're giving a gift, and a gift you can give through kinyan agav. But if you're going to say it's chotzer, right, and then he's going to get it through hefker, then you're back to the question: where is he? He's out at sea. He's not next to the property. So, but you see how the Gemara had to do a chap and say, you're saying he did a kinyan agav. Why don't you do it through chalipin? You can't do it through Chalipin because you don't own it. So now the Gemara wants to impute. So let's go back to the Gemara. Hochanami Toivus Hano Eina Mammon Liknus Al Gabi Karka. So the Gemara asks a question, just like you don't own it, therefore you don't have the ability of conveying for Chalipin, so too you should not be able to convey for Kinyan Agav. In other words, I'm selling you this land, and I'm saying, Agav the land, I'm going to give you the Maser. But wait a minute, the Maser is not yours to give. You don't own the Maser. You just have naming rights, and naming rights is not fungible in terms of Mammon. So you can't convey it through Agav. The Gemara asks the Kasha that Agav shouldn't be good enough, because since we established through Chalipin that you don't have ownership, if you don't have ownership, how can you give a matana? How can you give a matana through Kinyan Agav? You don't own it. It's not yours. You have naming rights, nothing more. So he wants to ask a kasha that you have to come on to Chotzer. You have to come on to Chotzer. If you come on to Chotzer, then we're back to it's a good kasha. Therefore, Rabbah says that Rav Abba didn't accept the teretz. He's right, he said, in not accepting the teretz, because it has to be Chotzer, like Rashi says. It can't be anything else. And if it's Chotzer, then we have a valid kasha on Ula. How could Ula you say that by Chotzer you have to stand next to it? We see that Rav Gamliel, using Kinyan Chotzer, gave the Maser to Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya, and he didn't stand next to it. So that's the perfect kasha. So that's how he comes roundabout. That's how he comes to it. Excuse me. Excuse me. All right. So now Rashi says, "Hochanami gabi kinyan karka, ain't a moment liktos al gabi karka." Just like by Chalipin, you can't do it. You can't do it by karka. Bekinyan shakarka niknavo el afkura ba'alma. Like you say, Jay, it's hefker. B'chi ogole mokum konsolo chotzera b'taras chotzer kishar hefker. Then you have to come back to chotzer for hefker. We're not talking about hefker by kinyan agav. And if we say that with Kinyan Agav he can't convey because it doesn't have monetary value, then you're only left with one thing, which is Chotzer. And by Chotzer, we're going to say he's going to make it Hefker, so that he can, when I convey Chotzer, it becomes whatever I convey is Hefker. But then we're back to square one. Then he has to stand next to it. He's not standing next to it. So we're back to the kasha. So that's the kasha that he asks here. Zok the Gemara, no. Velohi. So the Gemara takes objection to the theory that we just espoused, that it has to do with monetary value, and he says not so. Matnas kahuna nisina ksiva behu chalipen derach mekach umemker. You can't compare giving Truma and Masers to Chalipin. Why? Because Truma and Maser and Maser Oni, we have a Beferish Pasuk. The Pasuk says, V'nosati la Levi. He starts with the Levi, but because Kayan, the Truma, is the first thing you give. So he says, V'nosata, you have to give it. La Levi, la Ger, la Yoshev, la Almana. So you have to give it. So he says, it's an Asina Ksiva. It says the word Vanosa. Chalipin derech mekach hamemkahu. Chalipin appears mostly in a monetary transaction. Mekach hamemka meaning, the commerce. So he says you can't compare Chalipin to our case here. Why? Because even though you can convey a matana by Chalipin, you may give a matana by Chalipin, and he's giving him a matana. Appearances count, and the appearance of Chalipin in most cases is by Mekach from Memker. So it's going to appear as if he is giving the Maser to the Levi through a monetary transaction, and that we don't allow. So in other words, because Chalipin appears mostly, not exclusively, but mostly by Mekach and Memker, therefore you cannot compare Chalipin and say that he should have done it by Chalipin, and because it didn't have monetary value, therefore you have to come back to Chotzer. He's saying, no dice, I don't accept that. Therefore, it's you can't compare it. But however, he's saying that giving the gift through agav is a proper way of giving, and it doesn't appear as if it's mekach or memker. So the Gemara here is making the following distinction. Really, you don't have to come out to chutzner. It's not chutzner at all, and therefore I'm not stuck with the question of, well, he has to stand next to it, because by chutzner you have to stand next to it. You could really say he's giving it, as we said before, by kinyan agav. Kinyan agav is similar to chalipin, and just like chalipin he can't give him because he doesn't own it, so to kinyan agav he doesn't own it. And for the Gemara, no. I don't agree with you. Yes, he doesn't own it, but he still can convey it. Chalipin appears to be mekach or memker, e-commerce. I don't want to touch that because maser shouldn't even appear to be as if it's a barter. There's no exchange here. It's a gift. It's a one-way transaction. Therefore, chalipin does not apply. However, he's saying the kinyan agav does apply. V'nesina alimtohi. It's proper to give maser in this fashion, and therefore, even though the underlying transaction is a sale of a piece of land, the giving of the matana is totally separate because you can give it anywhere in the world. It's not tied to the land. If it was tied to the land, we would have a kasha because he doesn't own it. But because it's not tied to the land, it's the matana ba'alma, and he can give it anywhere. Therefore, the Gemara says it's not a kasha from this Mishnah of Rav Gamliel, because we can really say that he's not giving it b'toras chotzer, but he's giving it b'toras agav. Even so Rashi in his Havamina says it looks like it's chotzer and therefore shouldn't. Just like that was the Mishnah agav. Rashi says it looks like it's chotzer and therefore we have a kasha. The Torah says it's not chotzer and you can do it on kinyan agav, and that's the Gemara's teretz. Says the Gemara, Nesina kesiva behu kediksiv. It says in Devarim benasata lalevi zeh masharishin legia liyasam lamona zeh masa oni lefikach also liknosim besudar. Therefore, you can't use a sudar to the lady. Therefore, we want to have nothing to do with chalipin because chalipin is used primarily in monetary. You can think he's selling it, but when it comes to kinyan agav, it's nesina limtus as Rashi. Murta lahaknas matanas kahuna al gabi kar matnas kahuna.
One question about the ownership, because you said before, once he reaps the crop, he doesn't own it anymore. But that would then, but before he designated which 10% of his crop he's giving to the Levi, that would mean he doesn't own 100% of his crop. So doesn't have to wait until he designates which 10%? Otherwise, he has no ownership of the whole field.
Oh, so you want to impute the fiction even in the beginning. So what we're saying really is as follows. You have a field of 100 acres. It's your 100 acres. The minute you harvest, remember, when it's mechubal karka, he still owns it. The minute you start harvesting, the first thing you have to do is give truma, and then maser. So so we're pondering which minute or which second this applies. Okay, so now he has to give truma. Okay, now he has to give maser. We know that maser is 10%, and then there's truma's maser. Okay, so there are 10% of that field, which 10 we don't know, but 10% of that field is no longer his. So he now has to convey something that technically doesn't belong to him, but we don't know which part doesn't belong to him. So we're in this conundrum. What's he giving? So we're saying, you know what? Let's not worry about it. You just have to say to the Levi, I'm giving you 10%. Which 10%? We'll worry about it later. In fact, it may be the last 10% left in the field if the other 90 was already eaten by his family, because Rabbi Gamliel was on the boat. And there, the Gemara, the Mishnah there says he's worried that his family is going to start eating the fruit or the field. They're going to harvest. So he says, you know what? Gesundheit, harvest whatever you want. I don't care what you harvest. As long as you leave me 10%, I'm good. And so the Mefarshim there explained that Rav Gamliel wasn't worried because he had a big enough field that he knew they wouldn't eat the whole field by the time he came back. So he wasn't worried that his masa would be eaten by the family. But to your point, he does own it. He does really own it. It's just that the minute he harvests it, at that point in time, 10% belongs to the, which we don't care, 10% belongs, and that he has to convey in some fashion. Now, the mitzvah, because reason makdim and mitzvahs, so it says reason makdim and mitzvahs that the Gamliel didn't want to wait till he came back to even announce the conveyance. He said, oh, no, I want to announce the conveyance right now, and I'm going to do it by telling you that I'm renting, you're going to rent from me for $1 or whatever, a piece of the field, and that maser is yours on the field through Kinyan Agav, we'll say. So in other words, he's mekayim the mitzvah right away. He didn't want to wait until he came back. So that's why that happened. But if he didn't do it that way, it's also okay. If he didn't actually give him the rental of the field, then technically speaking, he would have had that maser. But then you could ask the kasha, yeah, but if he had that maser, how was he kind of it? How was he kind of it if he wasn't standing? So for that, let's look at the next Gemara, and we'll understand, even if he didn't lease him the field, and he said, I'm going to give you the 10%, l'chayre, that might be chotzer, and if it's chotzer, then he has to be there. Zok the Gemara, no. I mean, I'm hypothesizing. That's not what the Gemara is saying. I'm telling you that even without the Kinyan Agav, we have a terror. So let's quickly finish.
Question?
Yeah.
How do we prevent the family from eating the part that is yet to be specified?
No, Jay, that's just the point. That because it hasn't been specified, we're not makbid if they eat. We're not makbid what they eat, because he just designated it to a Levi, which the Mishnah says you should do right away, but you don't have to designate what you're giving him. That can come later. So if the let's say there was better parts of the field, not better parts of the field, and the family said, we're going for the best, and they start eating from the best of the field, let's just say, that's okay. It doesn't say masa has to be min mufcher, it just you have to give masa. So even if there was a best and not a best, assuming, we're not worried if the family goes for the best. Let them go and take whatever they want. Rav Gamliel said he wasn't worried because it was a big enough field that they wouldn't eat up his masa. That's all he was concerned about, not which produce.
So you have a theoretical here that somewhere in there, we're guaranteeing that the family, even though they have no knowledge, will not be eating the section that he designates in the future.
Correct.
That
exactly
doesn't,
right.
that doesn't happen with other things with kashrus.
It doesn't happen. It doesn't normally happen, but keep in mind that most of the time, again, this exception because of Gamliel was away at the time of the harvest. That doesn't always happen. I mean, Usually the owner is there. He oversees the harvest. He says, this is the truma, this is the masa, and gives it away. It just so happened in this hypothesis where Gamliel wasn't there, l'chayra you have a kasha. Why? Because how can he give it? It wasn't guarded. It wasn't there. Teretz says it doesn't have to be there. We're not worried about the eating part. The eating part, we'll say, will take care of itself. But we're more concerned with the halachic part. All right, so let's just finish. We have a few minutes left.
There'd be no question about Geneva there, right?
No, not at all. Not at all. Now, so let's go and Rav Papa Omar. So Rav Papa gives a different teretz, and this will answer any question, David, that you may still linger in your mind. Rav Papa Omar, das acheres makna oson shani. That our Mishnah, which talks about hefker, remember, our Mishnah talks about you found a deer that couldn't run and a bird that couldn't fly, or you found something lying on the field that doesn't belong to anybody, and you want to go ahead and be kained. So how are you kained? So the Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel says you're kained because you stand next to the field, and by standing next to, assuming first best is it has a fence. If it doesn't have a fence and you stand next to the field, that's your fence. That was the premise, right? Rav Papa says, no, I don't even have to come on to that. You're talking about a different situation. Das acheres makna osan. Rav Gamliel is talking about a das acheres. Someone is conveying to someone else. It isn't hefker. Rav Gamliel is conveying maser to Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya. When you convey, says Rav Papa, you don't have to stand next to the field. He's introducing a different concept. When you're standing next to the, if it's a story question of hefker, you have to stand. But when you're conveying das acheres, meaning another mind, someone else is conveying, shani. Frek the Gemara Amanoa Timra. How do I know? So he says, Ra osun rotzen achar metzia. He quotes our Mishnah. He saw someone running after the let's say the deer or the bird. V'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yochanan says in the classic case where there's no ownership, he has to be able to run afterwards and catch them, right? Because what did the Sefer of the Mishnah say? The Sefer of the Mishnah said that if a deer was running through your field, a healthy deer, you can't be kind of. Why? Because you can't catch it. You can't run after it. A bird comes in, you're going to run after the bird will fly away. We don't let you be kind of something that you can't control. But if a deer is lying hurt on your field and you can catch it, meaning you can go over and say, this is my deer, then you're allowed. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah, and Rabbi Yirmiyah comes and asks a kasha, how is it in the case? How is it in the case of matana? I give you a matana of something. Now, do you have to be able to run? Let's say I want to give you an animal as a matana. Do you have to be able to run after that animal and catch it? I'm giving you a matana. Do you have to run after it? Do you have to potentially be able to grab it and say it's mine? Rabbi Abba Bakana says, no, that even if you run after it and you can't reach it, the matana is still a matana. My tama, why? Shani. Isn't it because a das acheres gave it to you? In other words, I give you a matana. I'm giving you this deer. Do you have a minute that you have to be able to run after that deer and catch it in order for it to be you? I just gave you a matana. What does that have to do with anything? I'm giving you this deer. So you can't say when a third person gives a gift that you have to be able to run after it. So, and that's that Mishnah. So therefore we see from that Mishnah that by a matana, you don't have to be there because you don't have to run after it. Right? So that's Rav Papa's Chiddush. Rav Papa's Chiddush is, I don't need kinyan agav. I don't have to need any of these kinyanim. There's a difference between conveying from a third person or acquiring hefker. Our Mishnah here in Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, where it says that there was a wounded animal and you wanted to, or an object lying on the field and you want to be kona it, yeah, for that you have to be present. You have to stand next to it, so to speak, to guard it, because it's hefker, it doesn't belong to anybody. But if I'm giving you a matana, I'm giving you a gift, there's no requirement that on top of the gift, I have to also be able to physically acquire it. That's our Papa's Chiddush.
How can you give somebody a gift something that you don't own? I mean, if the deer's on a field, somebody else could come and take it before this other guy can.
No, I'm giving my deer. I'm giving my deer. I own a deer. I own the deer, and I'm giving it to you as a gift. From me to you, I'm giving you this deer.
Do you control it? I mean,
no, so that's what he's saying. You don't have to control it in order to be the recipient of the gift.
Suppose a deer leaves the field.
It's still your deer. It's still your deer. You own the deer. You may have to chase it.
Suppose it goes into your neighbor's field.
It's still yours. It's still yours because I gave it to you as a gift. That's what he wants to mechadish. Well, Papa is saying that when it comes from das acheres, meaning from another source, makna osan, you're kona it. If I give you a gift, it's yours. the fact that the gift eluded you, and now you're running after it and getting it somewhere else, does not take away from my having given you the gift. That's Rav Papa's chiddush. Therefore, he's saying when Rav Gamliel gave he's not worried about ownership. He's saying, here, this is yours. I'm giving you a gift. I have the right to give you a gift. I don't own it, but I have the right to give you this gift. It's maaser. Once you get my maaser, it's yours. You don't have
So
to.
this is not a regular gift. This is a maaser.
It's a maaser gift, correct. But you don't have to be there to physically control it, says Rav Papa. It's already given to you from another source. He wants to distinguish between our Mishnah of Hefker and the case of Rav Gamliel. Our Mishnah of Hefker, where nobody owns it, yes, you have to guard it. Then the whole question of guarding comes into place. But in the case of where you receive a gift from someone else, as in the case of Maaser, no. You don't have to then be there. You don't have to be there. And therefore, the kasha that was asked on Ula by Rabbi Rochana, where are you? Rabbi Gamliel was at sea, doesn't matter. He gave him a gift. When you give a gift, the recipient doesn't have to be there. Let's just finish one more line. Rav Simi, Amalei Rav Simi Rav Papa, Rav Simi asked a kasha to Rav Papa, Haraget the das acheres makna oso, das makna oso. Right? When you give a get to a woman, right, then it has to be in her dollar, she has to receive it. In other words, she has to guard it. So the man is giving the woman the get, and she has to be there. It has to be in her dollar amas. So how can you, Ula, say, according to Rav Papa, the das acheres, that when someone gives something to someone else, you don't have to be there. You don't have to have the shmira, as we call it here. You see, by get, you do have to have it. So Rav Papa's thesis doesn't work according to Ula, because we know the halacha is that a get can only be accepted if you throw it into the daled amas of the woman, which means that she has to, so to speak, be the guardian. So how can you tell me das acheres? If it comes from another source, it's valid. And for the Gemara, shani get is different. The isa bal karcha, because get, a woman has to accept whether she wants to or not if it's thrown in her daled amas. If a woman receives the get, she has no choice but to accept the get. Now, bisman hazeh, it's a little bit. I mean, you have to talk to her, and she has to be willing. But la halacha, she doesn't have to be. It's bal karcha. She has to accept the get. So if she has to accept the get, therefore it has to be in her daled amas. But by a gift, it's different, right? Zachar la'adam shelo b'fanav. We say that with a gift, something positive, it's zacha, even though he doesn't really even know about it, or I mean, he can renounce it. By the way, he can renounce it. But typically, if someone gives a gift to somebody else, it would be a positive for the recipient, and therefore he would feel good about it. Therefore, the Gemara says no. Rav Papa is correct that you can das acheres does not require shmira. Therefore, Ula is correct. Get is different because get, the woman has to accept it bal karcha. She has no choice. Therefore, she has to be there to, so to speak, in her daled amas to be the guardian. But in any other case where it's voluntary, where there is no bal karcha, as in our case here, where I give you a gift, or if Gamliel gave a gift to the Levi, he doesn't have to be there. So we have two terutzim to the kasher. One, that it's a kinyan agav, and a kinyan agav does not require shmira. A chaser does, but kinyan agav does not. And Rav Papa introduces to us this concept of that it comes from another source, das acheres, and das acheres does not require shmira. So those are the two terutzim that we have. In Mitzvah Shem, we'll pick it up. There's other questions later on. We'll Mitzvah Shem meet, I guess, in 3 weeks after Yontif. Everyone should have a Gemar Chesima Tova, a Geven Shiur, a good Kvittel, and then a wonderful Simcha, Dik Sukkot, Shmirat Zeres, Simchas Torah, and
Amen.
And Mitzvah Shem. Maybe by then we'll be behind it, but in any event, we should be Mesameach and Yontif, and we look forward to coming together in a few weeks.
Shekayach.
Amen.
Shekayach,
Rabbi.
Before Shalema to Rabbi Hyatt and all the Chayli Yisrael, and may Rabbi Shalom be merachim on all of Klal Yisrael.
Amen.
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 See you at the-
Everybody be well. Easy fast.